We have an update on West Virginia quarterback Nico Marchiol. We're going to talk about what's going on there and the message sent from Rich Rodriguez during his coach's show on Monday night. Here today on Between Eers. What's up, everybody? Happy Tuesday morning here on Between the Eers. Schuyler Callihan with you. And make sure you hit that like and subscribe button here on our YouTube page. Add West Virginia on SI. It's our final episode of this week on BTE. We will be back tomorrow, though, however, on the Walk Thru GameDay Show as Eugene Napoleon and I get into the weeds of the matchup between the Mountaineers and the BYU Cougars. And we'll also have the postgame show in the wee hours of Saturday morning because that one's a 10:30 p.m. kick Eastern time on Friday night. So we will still have the postgame show. And yes, we will still have the morning after. I might just pull an all-nighter that night because it might just be worth staying up a couple extra hours to make sure we have that Between Years episode up bright and early Saturday morning. So I promise you'll have it and make sure we get all of our thoughts out there. So last night on Rich Rod's coach's show at Kegler's, we did get a update of sorts, and it's kind of interesting, and it's really filled with a lot of substance. Nico has not only seen an expert or a professional or whatever the term is you want to call it, opinion out in Colorado, but now he has made his way down to Arizona and has also got some opinions there. And the results have been that he's going to miss several weeks and that he does have a foot injury, but that's about to the extent of what the injury is. We just know it's a foot problem. We don't know exactly what it is. But Rich Rod, I don't want to get too deep into my thoughts here because I don't really want to say certain things, but I'll just say I thought it was a smart thing for Rich to say, hey, Nico, we've got great doctors here at West Virginia. We trust them. We've got a really good medical staff and really like to have them take a look at you just to make sure that we're on the same page as the folks that he's seen out in Colorado and now Arizona. You guys know where I'm going with this probably, but I'm not going to just come out flat out and say exactly what is going on in my mind, but it's smart because you want to make sure that there is transparency, on both sides, what the situation is, what the next steps are, what the plan is. And that way, not only Nico understands what's going to happen, but so can Rich and the coaching staff, and they can operate accordingly. There's a lot of different scenarios that this could play out. Nico could come back and play later this season. Do I expect that to happen? No, I don't. Could it happen? Yes, it certainly could, but that's not my expectation. After the season, is he here in Morgantown? We'll see. We'll see. That's where I'll leave that at. I'll let you guys have that discussion. Let's just put it this way. For Rich Rod, I think you need to figure this thing out ASAP. If Nico wants to be a part of this thing, whether it's this year or beyond, you need to know that, like yesterday. And I think it's very important on Nico's part to come back to Morgantown and get checked out by the doctors here so that there is, some clarity and both sides can agree in one way or another, that this whatever next step is the best step for him and the best step for the program. There can't be this gray cloud around this situation. And for Rich, you're trying to find a spark at quarterback. You're trying to find the answer. And let's just be honest, Nico was not the guy. He did not provide that spark. Not to say he couldn't or that he wouldn't never will, but considering I just don't expect him to be back on the field this season. you're probably looking at Khalil Wilkins, Jalen Henderson, Scotty Fox, Max Brown, one of those four guys to emerge, and maybe one of them does. And by the time that happens, you've probably got, well, I shouldn't say probably, you have a chance of finding your guy for 2026 in that group as well. Now, for Nico, it's a tough spot because, he's waited his turn. He's been patient. He's been extremely loyal to West Virginia throughout this entire thing. Going back to when he lost the job to Garrett Green a couple of years ago, he could have left after Green's first year after in 2023 when he put up really good numbers. He could have left then. He didn't. I don't think anybody blames him for being, in whatever the situation is. I don't think a lot of people are upset about the situation. Yeah, there's a lot of joking going on about, is he going to pull a Tucker DeVries and all that? And like, I think everyone understands where this could be potentially heading and more than likely could be heading. But I don't think there's anybody out there that is just, you know, all over the kid for being in this spot because it wasn't the coach that he picked. It wasn't the offense that he picked. It wasn't the situation that he picked to be in. And unfortunately, it just didn't work in these first 4 or 5 games for him in this offense. And as I had said throughout the first handful of games, he can be successful in this offense. I still believe it. I still believe a quarterback of his style can work in this offense. But as I've said a billion times, it has to have more, he has to have more help around him for it to work. For Khalil Wilkins, you saw it this past Saturday. You don't need everything to be perfect for it to work. For Nico, it did because the pass protection was so leaky. You can't have a pocket passing quarterback sitting back there, a stationary target in this offense when the offensive line is as putrid as it's been. That's just the flat out truth. Now, when you have Khalil Wilkins or you have Jalen Henderson or Max Brown, Scotty Fox, one of those guys that can really move around and get away from that pressure, that's a different story. They can make plays off schedule. We saw it with Khalil a couple of times. We saw it with Jalen Henderson once in the Kansas game. There was a couple of plays, one with Jalen, one with Khalil. The Jalen one was against Kansas. The one with Khalil was against Utah, where they both rolled out to their left, looked like they were about to take off, and instead they ended up throwing a ball. Jalen Henderson, kind of dumped it off, got an 8 or 9 yard gain close to the sticks. Khalil threw it past the first down markers, moved the chains. That ability was not there for Nico. Anytime he would try to roll out, it wasn't able to come to fruition because he was unable to run away from that pressure. And was he impacted by this foot injury? Yeah, maybe, but I don't really know that that's a huge deal because if you look back at what he did, in his previous experience in the previous under the previous regime, he wasn't a swift mover by any means, by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he's a willing runner as we've talked about, but because you're a willing runner doesn't mean you have the speed to run away from people. And there were way too many times, specifically in the past, where he'd hold on to the football too long in the pocket. It would collapse. He'd have pressure. He couldn't get out of the pocket, and he'd be brought down for a sack. Or when he gets on the move, there's really no extra gear to get him out on the perimeter and in a spot where he can make something happen. So was the foot impacting him? Yeah, I don't want to speculate that it didn't, but I don't know that it played as big of a factor in his or the offensive struggles, if that makes sense. But for Rich Rod moving forward, I think this is a clear like, hey, Nico, like brother, if you don't give us an answer as to what your situation is, if you want to sit the rest of the season because you feel like that's best for you and your health and whatever, then that's fine. But you need to find that answer sooner than later. And I think they will. I think we're going to hear something probably. I wouldn't be shocked if we didn't hear something later this week, early next week. We won't see or hear from Rich during the bye week, but I would expect we'll get some sort of an update, whether it's from him, maybe even Nico. I don't know, but I would expect we'll hear something relatively soon because you're at that 4 game mark. It is self redshirt season, and I'm not getting into the whole Tucker to Vrees type of situation. I'll just leave it at this. He's at the 4 game mark. If he plays in another game, he can't redshirt. Make of that what you will. But back to the guys that are available. Khalil Wilkins, to me, is the guy that provides the most spark, but it's got to be consistent. Now, we've seen some of those things out of Jalen Henderson. We saw it last week against Kansas, or 2 weeks ago, I should say. We saw it at times from Scotty Fox early in the season. So they've each kind of had their moment, if you will. Now you need one of those guys to step up and show that every single week. Can one of those guys take hold of this thing and say, "This is my job"? That's the big challenge, the big question mark right now. The problem, as I've said many times this week already, and I think people are just glossing over it and misinterpreting what I'm saying here. I'm not advocating that Jalen Henderson should start. I'm not saying that he played better than Khalil Wilkins. What I'm telling you is that making your first ever career start at this level on a short week on the road in that environment against that team is not easy. And what you need to do as a head coach is put your guys in a situation to not only be successful, but to protect them. You have to protect their confidence, protect their good habits to make sure that no new bad habits develop. Now, could those new bad habits develop in a relief situation? Yes, they certainly can. But is he coming into a game similar to this past week where the game's kind of already out of hand? Maybe that's the case. And then you come out of the bye week and maybe you start Khalil against UCF. That could be the case. Now, I'm not saying he can't start this week. That's totally a possibility. I don't rule anything out in this mix. I wouldn't rule out Scotty Fox starting at this point. I mean, that's a little bit bold if we're being honest, but I can't count anything out in regards to this quarterback situation. But you have to keep that in mind that it would be his first start on the road in that environment against that defense. It's not easy. It's not ideal. It's far from ideal. So as easy as it is to just sit back and watch the highlights from the Utah game and say, yeah, Khalil played better. He's clearly the option. You just got to just go and put him out there. Put him out there, just whatever. Start him the last 7 games, see what you got. You just can't do that. Not at that position. It's a fragile position. You can maybe get away with that at defensive end or linebacker or tight end or whatever, but you can't do it at certain positions, especially quarterback. Once those guys take a huge confidence hit, sometimes those guys don't bounce back. And that's what you want to try to prevent this week. So if Rich believes that Khalil can go into the game, play winning football, and can have a game plan that sets him up to be successful, then he'll start. If he still believes he can be successful, but believes it's a better thing for him to come in a relief situation, then he'll do that. Trust what Rich Rod does this week. Moving forward, I think we can have a discussion. But you got to be careful when you're doing this, going into a short week. You don't have a full week of reps to kind of take over as that starting role. You're about to go into a bye week, so you don't want to have him having that bad taste in his mouth if that happens for 2 weeks. You want him going into that bye week feeling pretty damn good about himself. So, once again, not advocating for Jalen Henderson to start, but it's something to keep in mind. Jalen didn't play bad. Like, he didn't play terribly bad. He didn't play great. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Rich even said it. He just didn't have any help at all. But That's kind of been the case all year with these quarterbacks. They just haven't had help because of the offensive line. They need to do their part. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with this whole Nico situation. I have a pretty good idea what's going to happen. I think a lot of people do. But until you get that final, yes, this is the direction they're going in, you just don't know. But I do think the one thing I do want to talk about here is the message that Rich Rod sent. And it was not in any way a direct answer to a question about self-redshirting. It wasn't a answer that was, about Nico directly. Now, people can make their assumptions. I know I certainly had my assumptions, and I'm sure you did too if you watched or if you listened to it or if you've seen the articles on our website and read the quotes. But it goes to say that Rich is definitely making sure that this culture is not going to have any fractures in it. And it's not just with this Nico situation, it's other guys. We've seen, one player already removed from the roster earlier this year. It was a veteran cornerback. And that's going to be the way this thing moves going forward. And that's how it should be. If you're not all in, you need to go. That's what Rich Rod said. And he's 100% correct. And that's why it's very important that Nico is transparent in this situation with the coaching staff at WVU, and they can get on the same page and go on to the next steps of whatever that is. But he's 100% correct. If you're not all in, you need to go. Because, folks, I'm telling you, I don't think for those of you that have never actually physically been on a team at this level or at really any level, higher than, Little League, it only takes one. It really does. And I'm not suggesting that the one is Nico. I'm just speaking in the broader sense here because he did say players or coaches that aren't bought in or all in. All it takes is one person. One person that feels like their process is better or their way of thinking is better or that you're doing it the wrong way or that you're making the wrong decisions. If it's just that one person, it can shatter that entire locker room. It can. That is why it is so important to set a foundation, set a culture, set a standard in year one, and build on that in year two. Wins are great. Everyone would love to go 12-0. But you have to find what that culture is. You have to establish it, and you can't sacrifice it, as Rich has said many times. So if you're not all in, you need to go. That's going to do it for us here today on Between the Ears. I'm Schuyler Callihan. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. We greatly appreciate all the help and the support here on the show. And that's going to do it for us here today. We'll be back again tomorrow for the Walk Thru GameDay Show, previewing West Virginia and BYU with Eugene Napoleon. So until then, take care.